Hi, everyone. It's Marla. Welcome back to Light and Liberty. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that you're all doing well. Certainly has been a crazy few weeks, the last 4 weeks. There's been just really quick shifts happening. Energetic releases is what I want to say. And the energy is very, very tense. We've had several things happen over the past month. First, we had an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Then we had Joe Biden stepping out of the race. We had Kamala Harris being installed in his place. Then we had this controversy over the Olympic Games in Paris, or the opening ceremony of the Games. I guess technically there's been controversies within the Games as well, not just with the opening ceremonies. We have that terrible situation that happened in Southport, and then subsequent riots and counter riots. And it just seems like everything is in chaos. And, like personally, I've been feeling very down due to the energy. I'm very sensitive to what is happening in the collective. Whether I know it's happening or not, I tend to feel it. And so I was telling a few friends of mine recently how I've been so depressed. And then it dawned on me, like, because I've been asking myself, why do I feel so depressed? Like nothing is going on in my life. And I'm generally not the type of person that has an issue with depression. But then as I was preparing for this video, I was like, well, it's no wonder that I feel depressed because of everything that's happening. And it wants us to feel like we have no control. And that feels very frustrating. So while dealing with all this, I began to look at the astrology chart. Haven't really talked much about astrology here, but I have another channel called Twin Astrology where I do a lot of work with astrology and especially asteroids for those of you that don't follow me. And I'm always studying what the asteroids are doing. So I found something very interesting and I really wanted to share it with you. And so, I a lot of it is going to be around the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games, but I might touch on some of the other issues. And now you might say, well, that's kind of past. I realized that I was on vacation. I started my vacation the first day that the Olympic Games opened. And so I didn't have my stuff in order to do a video. And I like to sit with things anyways and let them percolate, let them see how things play out. And I've been doing that as well. So um yeah, so what I see in the astrology chart with the asteroids is that we've had this opposition. And for those of you who don't know astrology much, it means we've had two asteroids opposite each other for the month of July, and they're just starting to separate now. And that is Yeshua on one side and Lucifer on the other side. In my last video, I talked about the levels of consciousness and how they relate to our understanding. And I talked a lot about what goes on in this kind of fourth dimensional reality where we're not in the physical world, we're not really in the higher, real high spiritual realms, and that this is where a lot of that battle is taking place. Well, it seems like that video was rather timely because then we had this opposition happen and it really released a lot of dark energy, especially the situation with the games. But yeah, it's been happening, since the beginning of July. So encompassing the Trump assassination, going all the way to this week. And we see these tense energies. a lot of division, a lot of division happening. And I think the controversy of the games and that opening ceremony, really brought that energy of Yeshua opposed Lucifer into some kind of perspective. And that's why I'm going to focus on looking at the astrology chart for that time period. Okay, so here's the chart for July 26th. Let me just say before I get started that I didn't watch the opening ceremonies. I didn't even know that the Olympics were on until the next day when I was scrolling on YouTube and watching some of the commentators I normally check in with, and they were talking about this. So I never saw the full opening ceremony. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't have watched it anyways, starting with Lady Gaga performing for yeah, since I've been on my awakening journey, there's been a lot of musicians that I just can't tolerate listening to because their energy is very dark. And one of the first people on that list was Lady Gaga. So, yeah, I probably would not have watched it. But of course, we had this controversy over the Last Supper. Were they trying to represent the Last Supper? Were they trying to mock it? And there was much controversy and gaslighting over whether that's what the intention was or not. So, of course, I decided to check the astrology chart to see what astrology would have to say about the energy that was behind this moment. So I had already had a chart drawn for this day because on July 26th, the asteroid Chiron went retrograde. And that's a very important piece to this energy and also the energy that's been happening for the last 5 weeks. So I took that chart for Chiron's retrograde, which I originally created for New York City, and I changed the city to Paris, France. And I put in some asteroids. And the first thing that I noticed, I think I actually already had some asteroids in because I was charting some other things. The first thing I noticed when I made that change was that asteroid Yeshua was at 23 degrees, 57 minutes of Sagittarius. And Lucifer was exactly opposite at 23 degrees, 57 minutes. Sorry. That is an exact opposition. That is extremely rare for something to be exact like that. So that was definitely something that flagged me to go even deeper into this situation. Now here's Chiron. Chiron's also at 23 degrees, 32 minutes of Aries. So Chiron is making a trine to Yeshua and a sextile to Lucifer. This is interesting because Chiron represents our wounding, our soul wound. And for humanity, the soul wound is separation from God. The fact that Chiron was stationed to retrograde means that Chiron was not moving. It wasn't moving forward or backwards. When a planet stations, it slowly comes to a stop before it starts moving backwards. So it was at this complete stop energy. And this controversy brought this wound of separation from God, and it just threw it out, exploded it in the collective consciousness. This is literally representing the battle between light and dark and how we heal this for ourselves and for collective. So there was a big deal made about Christians, And I think that we really need to expand that and not just say that this might have been offensive to Christians, but has an awakening person, and I know many of you out there are awakening as well. No matter what religion we were born to, we understand that Yeshua or Jesus represents Christ consciousness. And that in order to fully awaken and ascend, we need to embody that Christ consciousness within ourselves. So we have a deep connection with Christ. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that has that connection with Christ has a connection to a actual church or the Catholic religion or some Christian religion. For me personally, I was raised as a Christian, and a few years ago, I had to step away from that. And I identified as a pagan for a few years. And then in 2019, I came back to Jesus. Although, I never really left Jesus, but I had to heal a lot of religious trauma that I had experienced on a personal and has on a soul level. And then when I cleared that, I came back to Jesus stronger than ever. If any of you are interested in hearing more about my journey with that, then let me know in the comments and maybe I'll do a video on it. But I bring this up because I can identify with both sides. I have considered myself a Christian, I've considered myself a pagan. And now I'm just deeply connected to Jesus, even though at this point in time, I don't necessarily go to a physical church and worship with a congregation, but that might happen for me soon. As well, I think there's a lot of other religions, Muslims, for instance, Buddhists, Hindus, who even though they don't worship Christ, I think that they might have not really enjoyed what was being portrayed at the opening ceremonies. Now, I want to say right here that I don't want to make this about gay people or transgender people or drag queens. That group was used simply to stir up controversy and to make it difficult for anybody or to say anything against what was being portrayed. I think with this Thomas Jolly, who was the creative director for the opening ceremony, really wanted to portray was a type of hedonism and destruction of social values. When we look at Lucifer or Satan and what Satan represents is the material world and how humanity gets stuck in the material world. They get stuck in the senses. And so that Luciferic energy is always trying to seduce humans into basically fulfill your every whim. Just do what you want to do. If you want to have an orgy, have an orgy. If you want to get drunk, get drunk. If you want to do drugs, you should do drugs. Now, saying that, I do believe in freedom, and I believe that people have the freedom to choose that if they want to. And I'm not going to stop them from doing that. But the attempt here was to use this as subtle propaganda. So there's a lot of brainwashing that occurs slowly over time, breaking down people's barriers by, showing menage a trois, which we saw at the opening ceremony. And over the last 10, 20 years, how often do you see that in movies? Do you see people talking about it? Um, and, in our society today, it's almost seems like there's a lot of men, especially, that expect that a woman should just do that for them. That's because these kinds of barriers have been slowly broken down by this low level exposure to it over and over and over again. Satanism uses sexuality a lot, sexual imagery, seduction, and sex is addictive. But is this appropriate for the opening ceremony? And was it put there really to bring people together? Or was it put there to divide us? Was it put there as propaganda? Was it put there as a slap in the face for people that have a different point of view? For those that are awakening, we know that having sex with someone really opens up your energetic field and that you're taking on all of that person's energy. So to have sex with random people can open you up to all kinds of things, yes, including possession. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things that the Luciferian energy loves to entice humans with. Where for people that are followers of Christ or some other kind of religion in a similar vein, in most cases, sex is seen as something that is sacred. One way of looking at it is we have this soul wound, this chirotic wound of being separate from God. And how we fill that wound within ourselves is we can choose Christ and God, and we can fill ourselves with love and spirituality. We can focus on our soul journey and we can rise above the material world. Or we can focus strictly on the material world. We can ignore our soul and we can just live a life of pleasure. Just allow ourselves to be as hedonistic as we want to be and fill ourselves with sex and drugs and food and whatever else makes us feel good in the moment. And I think that was what was on display. Then there was the scene at the table, which most people found to be the most controversial part of it, and that it reminded people of Leonardo's Last Supper. And then there was a whole bunch of gaslighting around that. I've kind of been guided since June to do an SRT clearing for gaslighting, and I didn't get to it in June, and I was really busy in July, and I was thinking at the end of June, like, oh, I don't know, like the gaslighting is so obvious right now. I'm not sure I need to do this clearing. And at least for me, like, I have just been seeing the amount of gaslighting so clearly. It's just perhaps the worst it's ever been right now. So, in an article that I read from the Washington Post, this Thomas Jolly, the creative director, said that the event was not meant to be subversive or shock people or mock people. He said it was not inspired by the Last Supper. It's Dionysus who arrives at the table. And Dionysus is the Greek god of festivities and wine and is the father of Sequana, the goddess of the sun, he said. And the idea was instead to have a grand pagan festival connected to the gods of Olympus. Okay, so for him to say that he wasn't trying to be subversive or to shock people is complete gaslighting. I mean, he must have known that this was going to cause a controversy, whether or not people read this as the Last Supper. This was going to cause a controversy. And then the Musée Magnon, my French is terrible, sorry about that, made a post on social media saying that it was obviously based on The Feast of the Gods by the Dutch artist Jan van Bielert. And a lot of people posted that around and calling people so ignorant because they didn't realize it was this painting. By the way, I graduated with a degree in art history. I graduated magna cum laude and I specialized in Baroque art. And I never have studied this painting. So it's rather an obscure reference by, a notable but not a very famous artist. So I think that Thomas Jolly did come out later and say, oh, yeah, it's based on this painting. I find that very hard to believe. And if we were going to portray the Feast of the Gods, for instance, there's at least 3 paintings, also called the Feast of the Gods, that are much more famous and by more famous artists that one would have tried to emulate if you were trying to emulate a painting. But the fact of the matter is, this painting by Van Bielert is the only one that actually has a table and has people sitting around a table, because it's generally kind of shown as like a picnic style of festivities. But let's talk about this a little bit. As you can see in the astrology chart, there is an asteroid Dionysus, and Dionysus was making an exact conjunction with Karma. And this was square Neptune and Pisces. So I think that square to Neptune represents a little bit of illusion here. And we could say illusion maybe within the gaslighting, but also the illusion that he was obviously trying to create by portraying Dionysus in the role of Christ. I want to mention this too before I go on, is that we have asteroid Paris at 27 degrees Aries, conjunct the asteroid Eris. Now this is going to figure into what I talk about in a moment. And Chiron is conjunct Eris. Eris is the goddess of discord. So the fact that we have Paris conjunct Eris is showing that there was a lot of discord over the things that are happening in Paris. But the Sabian symbol for Paris as well is a large disappointed audience. So I think that was kind of a little funny telling symbol of what was happening. But if we look at what Dionysus represents, of course, Dionysus is the god of wine. He's the god of ecstasy. And he's the son of Zeus and Semele. Now, Zeus's wife, Hera, was always very jealous. So she went after Semele and basically caused her death. And so Zeus took Dionysus out of Semele and sewed him into his thigh and kept him there until he reached maturity. So Dionysus was technically born twice. Now his second birth was actually, he was birthed from a man because he came out of Zeus's leg. But one of the things that Dionysus represents is rebirth. And of course, Yeshua represents rebirth as well. Dionysus is also known to be rather effeminate or androgynous. You can see statues of him where he has male genitalia, but for instance, his hair is very feminine looking and stylized. So Zeus had to hide Dionysus from Hera. So he sent him to live with the Maenads. The Maenads were female followers of Dionysus, and they come from the Greek word for mad or demented. During orgiastic rites of Dionysus, they roamed the countryside performing ecstatic dances and were believed to be possessed by Dionysus. They were said to have unusual strength and could tear animals or people to pieces. And this became part of Dionysus' symbolism. And he would send them to tear his enemies apart. And this symbolizes the rendering or tearing down of the old in order to be reborn as Dionysus was. Now, I know a lot of people made some snarky comments about if Christians are offended, then they should realize that their iconography, their symbolism was stolen from Dionysus. But I think Dionysus' symbolism was actually stolen from earlier gods, such as Osiris. And if we look at human culture and we take different civilizations that lived in different locations that didn't even have contact with each other, they often have similar symbolism because that symbolism represents the human condition and the collective consciousness. But perhaps one of the things that Jolly was trying to represent here, and I think it really was this breaking down of the old order. And I think that that was one of the reasons why he had Dionysus here front and center. It's tearing down, breaking down. And this was shown even more clearly by this tableau he had of Marie Antoinette, which I also found very distasteful. They had her standing there beheaded, holding her head in front of the very building where she had been imprisoned. And she was saying, "The aristocrats will hang them." And I felt like that was a very kind of threatening message to subliminally give people, because he's portraying this new order, and Marie Antoinette is representing the old order, and how if you don't follow the new order, you're going to be guillotined. And then, of course, there was this red, the building looked like it was covered in blood as well. As I said, there were all these sarcastic comments on social media, and people were saying, of course, this isn't based on Da Vinci. It's based on this other painting, Feast of the Gods, as if something cannot have multiple meanings. And certainly, as artists and people that follow art, we understand that art, music, theater, movies has multiple meanings depending on the person who's observing it. So to say, oh no, you can't believe that it's this because it's really this, that just doesn't follow with true artistic expression. So if people saw it and that's what they thought, if they thought about Leonardo da Vinci, well, then that's what it meant to them, and they shouldn't have to apologize for that. But going back to Dionysus, the followers of Dionysus included spirits of fertility, such as satyrs, and in his rituals, the phallus was very prominent, and he often took the shape of animals. I should mention, by the way, too, that the Maenads, when they were in their ecstatic trance, they were said to hold occult powers, and they had the ability to charm snakes and suckle animals, which suckling animals used to be a sign of witchcraft, and they would search witches to see if they could find this teat that they would suckle their familiar animals from. Dionysus is a very earthy energy and very much associated with intoxication, sexuality, ecstatic states. There is a lot actually on the internet of people in the LGBTQ community identifying with Dionysus. So I don't think that that was iconography or symbolism that went over people's heads. If we look at the painting by Van Bielert, Dionysus is seen in the foreground, squirting grape juice into his mouth, representing, that he is the god of wine. But Jolly chose to show Dionysus coming out on a platter and being laid on top of the table. Now, Dionysus represents wine. What does Christ give us in order to transform our sins? Wine, representing his blood. Jesus also feeds us his body. And so the fact that he's representing Dionysus coming out on this platter is representing that he's wanting to show that we don't need Christ. We should be fed by this energy of Dionysus, which is of the earth. And, there's also some things out there that suggest that perhaps Lucifer was based on Dionysus. I'm not exactly sure that that's true, but images of Satan tend to be based on, like Pan, who was half man, half animal. He was half goat. And Pan was connected to Dionysus as well. Now, as I said, I didn't study this particular painting. And it's impossible, almost impossible, to find anything out about this painting right now that isn't connected to the opening ceremonies. So this is really getting censored, and the only thing that they're letting through about this painting are things that show it in a positive light connected to the Olympics. However, I did see one thing on social media that said that this was a mockery of the Last Supper. And while I think that this painting, Feast of the Gods, was inspired by images of the Last Supper, and especially because we have a table and the way the characters are arranged, he likely was inspired by Da Vinci, whose painting was created over 100 years before Van Bielert. Yes, he was known as a follower of Caravaggio, which is another thing that people like to bring up on social media. But when I think about this, I don't think that it was a mockery. I don't think this painting was made as a mockery because, in the 17th century, people were not going around mocking Christ. And Van Bielert, I'm sure, would have been a pious man. But yeah, I really can't find definite information regarding what the intention was or who the patron was for this painting in order to say. But let's say that the opening ceremonies really are just based on this painting, Feast of the Gods. And even that, in and of itself, gives us some interesting synchronicity and symbolism. Because this painting, Feast of the Gods, represents the gods celebrating the marriage of Thetis and Peleus. These are the parents of Achilles. And all the gods were invited to the ceremony except the goddess Eris, the goddess of discord. And this ceremony took place outside Chiron's cave on Mount Pelion. And Eris tried to come to this celebration and she was sent away. So she got pretty pissed off and she cast a golden apple amongst the goddesses addressed to the fairest. So Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena got into an argument over who was the fairest and who this apple belonged to. They tried to get Zeus to decide, but clever Zeus sent them to Paris of Troy to decide the issue. And Aphrodite promised him that he could marry Helen, the most beautiful mortal, if he would pick her as the fairest. So Paris did, and he abducted Helen, who was already married, and that started the Trojan War, which ended up destroying the city. So let's take a look at some of what is contained in this painting that I don't think people realize. But really, this is about the judgment of Paris. So this, where Paris has to decide who is the most beautiful goddess. That is the judgment of Paris. But isn't that kind of ironic because all this judgment was brought down on Paris for this situation? We have Eris involved in this painting, the goddess of discord. As I said, here is the asteroid Eris and the asteroid Paris conjunct each other. It's at Chiron's cave. We've talked about Chiron as being part of this. And then we have the start of a great war. And we know that the Trojan horse was how the Trojan War was won. And the Trojan horse looked to be one thing when it was something else. It was deceptive. And falling for the deception led to the downfall of Troy. So perhaps what we're suffering from here is a bit of a Trojan horse. Is this one thing or is it something else? It's a bit of a deception. And I think only each one of us can answer for ourselves of what they choose to see this as and how they choose to judge Paris. But one thing that we certainly can say is that this created a lot of division, a lot of anger and frustration. And I think ultimately for Christians, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because Christians have faith. And having their God mocked is not going to cause them to suddenly not have faith. In fact, what happened is that this actually made people's faith stronger. One thing, too, is that especially in 2024, we feel the energy of Christ and Christ consciousness growing massively. We see these celebrities converting to Christianity, for example, which is showing the power of this Christ energy and how it's awakening people. And the dark energy wants to counter that. And as I said in my other video, it will work through people who are not awakened, who are more invested in the material world, and it will try to attack people that are standing in the light. So yeah, ultimately, there was some anger being triggered, but it will only serve to make faith stronger. And on the other side, it may have strengthened their beliefs in the opposite. But in order to heal this Chiron wound, we have to find a way to connect with each other. It's so difficult when we have these situations that create so many arguments between people. I wonder sometimes, will there ever come a day where people give up arguing about this and just be willing to sit down and talk to each other? What's clear is that both sides think they're right. The other side is going to choose what they're going to choose. And we can't control other people. They have a right to do what they want to do. They even have a right to have whatever they want to have in the opening ceremonies. But I do think it's important not to shut our eyes to these things, in the sense that we have to understand that we're being programmed by everything that we see and everything that we hear. And again, I'm not making this in any way negative towards gay people, but there seems to me to be this theme of get with the new order or else, and nothing else is going to be tolerated. And so that's what we can't shut our eyes to. And we have to prevent ourselves from being programmed by that which is not from the light, that wants to distract us from our soul and lead us into living from our egoic passions and fulfilling our every whim. I want to show something else that's interesting here. This is the chart for Thomas Jolly, the artistic director. And over here in Libra, he has Mars pretty tightly conjunct asteroid Lucifer. Now, Mars is our masculine energy. It's our willpower, our drive to achieve. It's our sexual energy. And this conjunction makes an exact square with the asteroids Karl Marx and Bacchus, Bacchus being another name for Dionysus. And also Yeshua squares Lucifer in his chart. Mars, Lucifer makes an inconjunction to Chiron. I'm not sure if I said this earlier, I think I did, but when I compared the chart for July 26, which as I said was Chiron station, with other people, I compared it with Thomas Jolly, I looked at it with Emmanuel Macron, I compared it to another person that maybe I'll talk about in a minute, and Chiron was affected in each case. But this actually makes a yod, or a finger of God, which when we take this Mars Lucifer and it makes a sextile to Leonardo, and those asteroids both make an inconjunction to Chiron. I know that's a lot of astrology for people that don't know about astrology, but yeah, a finger of God is very prominent when it's in people's chart. It's bringing something into focus. And also, he has asteroid Karma, makes a trine with that same Lucifer-Mars conjunction, and his name asteroid Thomas. What this tells me is that there is more going on here than just what is happening for him in this life. This is something that spans multiple lifetimes. He actually has a lot of planets here squaring his nodal axis. And that tells me that he has a lot of energy that he's trying to sort out. I'm not going to actually go through an entire chart reading for him, but I just wanted to show these connections. Incidentally, that conjunction at 17 Libra is on the Sabian symbol. Two men placed under arrest give an accounting for their acts before the tribunal of society. For those of you that don't know, the Sabian symbols, there's a little saying, a phrase for each degree of the zodiac that gives us more information about that. So this says, from the book by Linda Hill, The Sabian Symbols, people's ideas or actions may be under criticism or examination to the point of feeling that someone has offended social responsibility and acceptability. They may have to justify or explain themselves, and relationships can be held in limbo until all the facts come to light. There may be a need to be thoughtful about the situation because there may be nothing but suspicion at this point. This case may well be dismissed with people forgiven or let off the hook, but with suspicion in the air, what permanent damage has already been done? Often a sense of trust and belief in the goodness of people is necessary. An attitude of forgiveness may be really important to move through the situation with one's sense of pride intact. People in positions of power, physically or emotionally, should show mercy so others can also forgive and forget and get on with their lives. Ultimately, the goal must lead to freedom. Positive keywords are pleading one's case, needing legal help, unacceptable principles, blowing the whistle, pointing to others, people unable to relate, the Romeo and Juliet story. And I think I read that he also directed or was the artistic director for a production of Romeo and Juliet. Restrictions, karma to be worked out, circumstances out of control, parades, lawyers, judges, the law, juries, tribunals. Negative keywords are refusing to conform, unable to move, feeling stuck, deadening emotions, not having one's point of view heard, losing one's authority, being bound karmically, being tied up and limited. Really interesting. All right, this video is getting rather long. Definitely a lot of other coincidences with other people. I would love to talk to you guys about what's going on in, for example, Kamala Harris's chart. She actually had that Yeshua Lucifer opposition conjunct her nodal axis. So Yeshua was on the south node and Lucifer was on her north node as she was chosen to be the next candidate. So let me know if you like these, if you would like me to do more astrology. I'm also thinking about doing kind of a meet the candidate type of astrology reading for all of the people that are going to be running in the election. So let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you soon.